This is a podcast from the Samplecast, Volume 2, Episode 52.
The Samplecast.
Hello and welcome. I'm Ruben Cornell, your host for this episode and every episode so far of the Samplecast. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm really excited about this week's show. I don't know about you, but sometimes when I hear a piece of music, all I want to do is go to the composer, bend their ear and find out how it's done. And I came across a track a couple of weeks ago on YouTube via Facebook. It was one of the Facebook groups, sample libraries or composers, sample libraries for Kontakt, something like that. Anyway, the piece was a remake of the 1960s Spiderman theme tune, and I absolutely loved it. It was done in a new, fantastic, epic orchestral style, and I really wanted to get hold of the composer and chat to them about exactly how they put it together. And luckily this week, the composer Benjamin Squires has agreed to do exactly that. So later on in the show, there'll be a 10-minute interview from him where he exposes all of the sample libraries that he uses and all of the techniques and mixing options that went into making that particular track. So thank you very much to Benjamin. Aside from that, we've got bargains in this show, we've got quite a few freebies, there's an interesting developer update, and we've also got lots of news. But before I get into that, let me tell you how you can get in touch with the show. You can email us directly, thesamplecast@gmail.com. You can head to Twitter, we're at thesamplecast. You can find the Samplecast on Facebook, or you can hunt me down personally, it's Ruben Cornell. I love to hear from people that are listening and enjoying the show. And if you're not enjoying the show, well, one, what are you doing listening? But two, I want to know how I can make it better. So if there are things that you particularly would like to change, things you want to expand on, please do let me know. It's all part of the Samplecast. I'm really bouncing off you guys all the time and taking your ideas on board and running with them. So without further ado, let's get into the news.
Roundup.
Have you ever wanted to play a tune by using the sounds of a floppy disk drive? No? Well, me neither, but that hasn't stopped Sampleso releasing this new library, which is called Floppytron. It's stuffed full of recordings of authentic retro disk drive noises. It runs in the full version of Kontakt 5.6.8 and above, and although I'm taking the piss, it is actually a cool little library. There's 100 really varied presets here, and the beat sync engine can sync the rhythmic samples to your DAW's tempo. Throw in a whole bundle of effects and step sequences and you might be surprised at how versatile this little library can be. You can create everything from hard EDM bass lines to soundscapes, so I definitely recommend having a look at the Sampleso website. Next up, Vintage Chords by Loops de la Creme. Now, back in the day, I was a massive raver, so I couldn't not include vintage chords. This includes classic keyboard sampler sounds from the 1970s onwards, and it really looks such fun to play. It runs in the full version of Kontakt 5.3 and above. It's 1.6 gigabytes in size, and you can combine 60 different voices here to create your own chords or use one of the 36 presets on board. Now, these chords really brought me back to the sampled kind of house and rave keyboard lines of my youth, especially using the chord memory function, which maps a user-definable chord across the whole keyboard. It's really fun stuff. Check it out at the Loops de la Creme website. Not having heard of this next company before, I went into this library completely blind, but I have to say I was pretty much blown away by the demos. This is Solo Opera from Organic Samples. This female soprano soloist is captured in a 3-microphone array with true legato sampling. This library runs in the full version of Kontakt 5.5.1 and above, and is 4.5 gigabytes in size. Now, as well as the solo voice here, you've got an interesting looking tension builder patch for creating clusters. Sadly, there's no walkthrough video online yet, so I'll be interested to see how this library progresses and how easy it is to program and incorporate into my projects. They're a fledgling company, so do give Organic Samples some support by checking this out. Just in case you don't have enough vintage Rhodes instruments in your arsenal, here's a new one from Sonic Couture. It's the Canterbury Suitcase. They've recorded here 3 different signal paths. You've got a line out, a close mic'd speaker cabinet, and natural room ambience as well. Uncompressed, this is 16 gigabytes in size, runs in Kontakt Player 5.6.8 and above, and they've sampled up to 25 velocity layers here, with the engine containing controls for reverb, velocity mapping, key and pedal noises, plus harmonic voicing options too. Have a look at the Sonic Couture website for details.
Bargain VST.
It's a pretty big week for bargains. We'll kick off with this week's brand new deal from Audio Plugin Deals. It's a huge one and it includes 8 of Audio Imperia's best sound design and cinematic packs for the full version of Kontakt. So these have been combined all into one bundle, and these packs normally retail for an average of around $50 each. They're over 12 gigabytes in size when you total them all up. For the next couple of weeks, there's 78% off at just $99. Do click the link in the show notes to check them out. Stacker by Sample Magic next, and VST Buzz keep giving us the good stuff with this new percussion plugin. I hadn't investigated it fully before this deal came out, but after looking into it in more detail, I have to say I'm sold. It is a sophisticated drum designer where you can layer sounds and surgically edit them to create powerful hits, or you can just head over to the 1200 presets if you're feeling lazy. It can also be used to create sound design tones and atmospheric effects. Really versatile, I think. Stacker has garnered some impressive reviews from audio media outlets, and I wouldn't hesitate in recommending it. It's currently 70% off at €29.99. Do click the link in the description for details. We'll finish up with a couple of quick mentions. First up, the summer sale by The Unfinished. Now, there's loads of quality synth presets on the Unfinished website. I definitely urge you to have a look. Whatever synth you're using, you're likely to find something to tickle your oscillators here. There's up to 50% off at theunfinished.co.uk, and don't forget to use the code FABORAMA. Lastly, do check out the bundles page at Plugin Boutique. They've got loads of awesome bundles, starting at about 50% off and going into even deeper discounts. Click the link in the show notes for details.
Interview.
It's time for this week's composer demo, and please join me in welcoming composer Benjamin Squires to this week's Samplecast. He came to my attention through his awesome mock-ups of famous movie scores, and his most recent one has racked up over 1 million views on YouTube. It takes the original 1960s Spiderman theme tune Spiderman does whatever a spider can, and gives it an updated orchestral twist. And to be honest, I just love it, along with 1 million other people on YouTube. On this week's Samplecast podcast, Benjamin talks us through the creation process, exactly which sample libraries he used, and his mixing techniques as well.
Hey everyone, my name is Ben Squires. I'm going to look today through some of the samples that I'm working with these days and the process behind the passion project that was my Spiderman fan soundtrack. Jumping straight into the tech side of it, there is a lot going on in this track, probably too much when I look back at it now. Mixing for me can tend to feel like a constant struggle between throwing way too much in the mix or just not nearly enough. Looking at the strings in particular in this track, and in pretty much anything I do these days, I'm using Cinematic Studio strings most of the time, pretty much all of the time. I'm usually finding an excuse to use it, to be honest. I really can't recommend this library enough. It just came out of nowhere. Obviously Alex had made cinematic strings beforehand, which I loved, and they were my go-to strings then too, alongside Hollywood strings. But this immediately became my go-to string library. I must say I much prefer a really clean and crisp sound to my strings, so their natural sound is a little bit too dull for my taste, but it's gotten to the point where I've just used these strings enough that I've just got EQ presets set up for each of the sections of the strings, and I just work from there. I'm also layering CSS with a few patches from Metropolis Arc 1. I wouldn't use them by themselves, but they have a really big sound to them that I like for layering. It works especially well with trailer music too. I want to give a mention to the legacy samples available from Performance Samples as well. They're just too good to be free. Layering up the string marcatos, for example, with CSS can make it sound really punchy, and they just perform really well, I guess hence the name Performance Samples. And finally, I have a couple of things from the Albion series going on in this track. A flautando patch from Albion 5, which I think is a really good library for what it does. It's not like it's trying to, replace any other library or anything. It has some really, really nice sounds in there. But yeah, I'm using a flautando patch from Albion 5 there, which is just super soft and really nice, and it just happens, I think it's somewhere in the middle of the track or something. I'm also using a Violins Run FX patch it's from Albion 4, and it happens near the end of the track. They have, Albion 4 is pretty much a go-to scoring tool for when I'm doing horrors or anything like that. Obviously, that doesn't make sense within this track, but, the effects in Albion 4, that's what it's made for. It's just, I literally scored 90% of a horror film with that library, so it's awesome for that. Also, before I forget, I want to mention the new Fluid Shorts by Performance Samples too, which, if I had them when I'd made this track, it just would have sounded so much better at parts. For super fast measure tremolos and stuff like that, it just can't be beaten. For staccatos and things, it's good, but you hear a bit too much of the phrase before the note, because the samples are taken from actual string phrases instead of just, performed samples. But definitely worth a mention. I think they're really, really good, and I use them for a lot of layer and stuff now. Next up is brass, and Hollywood Brass from East West, despite its age, is still my go-to brass library. I find it to be the perfect blend between detailed orchestral samples and also just out-of-the-box, Hollywood-ready, epic quality. I think a lot of the short notes in there could use some work, but the legato is really fantastic still. So I tend to double up the short notes with either Angry Brass from Performance Samples, which again is just too good to be a free library, and also some Cinebrass. I want to mention the Monster Brass patch as well from Cinebrass Pro, which is just, it does exactly what it says on the tin. It's such a cool patch and I use it a lot, probably way too much. I do also use a random brass patch from 8DO's 8W library in this, which is just a brass bend down patch, to be honest. I haven't used 8W nearly as much as I'd hoped I would. I really hope that sample library developers don't keep making products based on a huge number of players in a section. The problem is that you just lose so much of the detail in the sound and the performance, and everything just starts to feel really washed out, and it just kind of feels like a gimmick, to be honest. I can't imagine making an orchestral track purely with 8W, it would be baked in so much reverb. There's definitely some handy stuff in the library for sure, but nothing in it replaced what I was already using, despite how much I wanted to, considering the price that they asked for it. And I used that bend down patch purely to move from one key to another, you know what they say about doing a key change in a song just sort of keeps things a bit fresh, and I just wanted to make sure that the audience was always engaged, to be honest. My woodwinds are mostly Spitfire woodwinds. I can't express how much I love the ability to make short notes even shorter. So when I first discovered Time Machine patches in Spitfire libraries, it felt like a godsend, amazing to use for really fast fanfare repetitions and stuff like that. So there's a bunch of really short flute notes going on in there. I don't actually like Spitfire's legato very much at all, but I can always rely on the short notes. The legato just feels way too hit and miss for me, compared to CSS, which feels quite delayed when you play it because of how much of the legato transition you actually hear. Spitfire legato can just end up sounding a bit too unnatural for me. That being said, if you listen to any of the Spitfire demos by Andy Blaney, they sound incredible. It makes me want to purchase everything Spitfire ever does. I think Andy actually does some of the legato scripting work on their libraries too, which would make sense, although I don't know if I've just made that up, to be honest. For choir, I like using the arcs from Lacrimosa and the big Mercato patches from Metropolis Arc. The arcs just have a really great movement and sound to them that you just can't capture from riding the mod wheel. Unfortunately, some of the other patches in Lacrimosa fall prey to what I was talking about earlier with the huge size of the ensemble. Less is more with this stuff, in my opinion. There's just so much more detail and power in the Metropolis Arc choir, for example, because you can hear just more detail. Percussion-wise, I like Hans Zimmer percussion a lot, although I only use the Junkie XL mixers. Honestly, I can really understand if people were disappointed with Hans Zimmer percussion at first, before the Junkie XL update. It just they add such a fuller sound. I'm also using 8DO Doll and the more recent hybrid 8D8 library for some of the bigger stuff. Timpani and stuff like that is from Spitfire Percussion, which I really love. And of course, Heaviosity's Damage is still more than welcome anywhere in my percussion. I also think that the long and short taiko rolls in Hybrid Tools 2 from 8DO are just amazing for trailer work and sometimes for stuff like this too. Combine them with hits from any Audio Imperia stuff and they can be really powerful. Most of the time, any synth pads that I use are from Jeremiah Penner's photosynthesis libraries. Whenever I get the chance, I shout about these libraries. They are so good and just not at all expensive really, so I would tell anybody to check them out if you're wanting to make ambient sort of music or just need a really good synth pad. Any other synth stuff is probably from UHE Zebra, which is just a little bit of a beast really. And that's pretty much it for the samples. When it comes to mixing, my number one rule, which I can never follow, is just to not make things complicated for yourself. Mixing, honestly, is so much more simple than people make it out to be, including myself. You constantly get lost in this need to throw more at the cue, thinking that it's not working and not sounding full enough, but most of the problem comes from not choosing the right sounds, not choosing the right arrangement. So if a mix isn't working, I'd say maybe take a step back and see where the problem started. I really did just do this track as a passion project. I think this might be my 5th one now. I started in 2012 when I kind of first started doing composing. I did a fan soundtrack for Skyfall because I just really loved the James Bond theme and I just wanted to experiment with it. And then in 2015 I did another one after I'd done a couple more random ones. And that was my first big one, which I did for Spectre, and it got it's now on over 500,000 views, which I thought was crazy at the time. I never expected that. And so, again, I never expected this with the Spiderman soundtrack, which now is sitting over 1 million views, which is just an insane thought, really. It's got more views than any of the official cues on YouTube, and the fans just, really responded to it. And I would really recommend doing just fan soundtracks every so often if you just want to experiment with, samples and just dive into what makes a theme great and stuff like that. And it can just be super cathartic to do this sort of thing once in a while and take a break from work by doing more music. Most of these fan soundtracks that I've done have actually led me to work in one way or another. For example, the first one I ever did, a guy reached out saying that he enjoyed it, and randomly we got in touch and I ended up scoring his horror film. The next one that I did, a YouTube channel got in touch with about 100,000 subscribers and they were making a sketch, and I ended up scoring that, and I still work with them as much as I can today. And then another one, which was the Spectre fan soundtrack, a guy got in touch who is basically as big of a James Bond fan as me, and he was in the middle of making a series and wanted to bring me on board to help orchestrate a song for one of the episodes, and I ended up actually scoring the entire series. So I think it just goes to show that when you do these things, you never know who is listening, what that can lead to. And I hope that's helpful for at least one person out there.
Composer demo. VST.
Kicking off this week's freebies are Sampletraxx, who must be feeling very generous at the moment as they've added Newforms to their online freebie selection. It's a whole bunch of Transformers style sound effects. It's over 300 megabytes in size, and you can find it right there on the Sampletraxx site. The link in the show notes goes straight to the freebies page, and you can also still find their free pack Sign Dust there as well. Do check them out. The guys over at Kontakt Hub have been promising a fully fledged instrument based on this granulation engine for a while now, but in the meantime you can download the engine itself for free, which runs in Kontakt. It doesn't come with any sample content, but you can easily drag in your own samples to the Kontakt mapping window and go crazy with the glitchy granulation effects. You must be logged into the Kontakt Hub website to get the freebie, but registration is super simple, so I'd recommend you head over there and give it a go. Lastly, Violation from Global Soundspace. Now, I was reminded of this library recently when Global Soundspace released a version 2, which is a paid version of the library with extra effects and a waveform view and a few other bells and whistles. That sells for €15, but if you're feeling a bit skint, you can actually get all the same content with version 1.1 for absolutely free. This Kontakt library contains all the noises of abused string instruments, including patches with pitch percussion, there's string effects, you've got scrapes and whispers as well. Do check it out at the Global Soundspace website. You've really got nothing to lose.
Developer update.
This week's developer update is a biggie. It's Soundiron's Ambius Prime. Now, Soundiron here have combined several of their older Ambius Atmosphere series into a brand new instrument. This one contains all the patches from Ambius's 1 and 2, plus 1,000 new sound sources. As a bonus, it now runs in the free Kontakt player 5.6.8 and above, and is over 12 gigabytes uncompressed in size. There are 100 master presets with 3 NKI banks. These initial presets can then be manipulated with the onboard XY pad. You've got effects and modulations panels as well. There's also 119 custom convolution impulse responses, and these can really mutate the sounds into some crazy ways. I actually wrote a demo for one of the older Ambius packs back in the day, and at the time I do remember having a really fun time with the library. So now this package has been rewritten and expanded, I can't wait to delve into the new sounds and the interface. Thank you so much for checking out this episode of the Samplecast, and thanks again to Benjamin Squires for being our composer in residence for the week. If you haven't already, please head over to iTunes where you can review and rate us. We've got a few reviews on there, but it would be lovely to have more. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, there are many ways to do it. You can find us on YouTube, on Twitter, we've got our own website, thesamplecast.com, and you can email us directly, thesamplecast@gmail.com. Quite a few people do that every week, and it's always great to hear from you, so thank you so much. We'll be back again next week with episode 53, and it's going to be a big one. I'm not going to tell you too much more than that, but there's a big product which we're going to be featuring. So thanks again for listening, and goodbye for now.